The Jedi loved to act like they were the wisest beings in the galaxy. But have you ever actually looked at their code? No attachments, no emotions, no passion? Sounds less like enlightenment and more like the rules to a really boring summer camp, where the counselors confiscate your phone and tell you to meditate until you forget what fun feels like. It is weird because these were supposed to be the guardians of peace, yet the one thing they outlawed was the very stuff that makes peace worth having. And the craziest part is how the Jedi kept convincing themselves it was working. You have masters sitting on the council preaching about serenity, while secretly bursting into tears when their Padawans die. You have Obi-Wan burying his love for Satine like he is some kind of emotional hoarder. Meanwhile, Yoda is out here saying fear leads to anger, but not once does he ever say, hey, maybe bottling it all up could blow up in our faces. It is like watching a group project, where everyone refuses to admit the plan is terrible. Anakin is falling apart. Padma is literally begging him to open up. And the council is too busy arguing over politics to notice the chosen one is about 5 minutes away from flipping sides. And then when Ahsoka gets falsely accused, instead of trusting her, they just shrug and go, well, the code says we cannot help you. It is infuriating, and also kind of hilarious in that, oh my gosh, they are actually this clueless way. But here is where it turns from funny to horrifying. The code did not just ruin lives, it practically sponsored the fall of the entire order. Anakin's secret marriage, his fear of loss, his inability to trust the council, all of it ties back to these rigid rules. The Jedi thought they were protecting themselves from corruption, but what they really did was set the galaxy up for Palpatine to waltz in with a smile and say, I got exactly what you need. The Sith must have been laughing their cloaks off. And yet, there is still something fascinating about how long they lasted. Thousands of years enforcing this impossible lifestyle, holding together an order so powerful that entire star systems bowed to their authority. That is either proof of incredible discipline or the galaxy's longest-running case of collective denial. Either way, it makes you realize that their collapse was not some sudden tragedy. It was inevitable, written into the DNA of their own philosophy from day one. In this video, we are going to break down why the Jedi Code was not just flawed but fatal, how it shaped the rise and fall of Anakin, why Ahsoka's exile was the biggest red flag the Order ignored, and how the rules they worshipped turned out to be their undoing. We will look at the irony, the heartbreak, and yes, the comedy of watching an order destroy itself with the very code they thought would save them. By the end, you will see why the Jedi were doomed, the moment they decided that peace meant erasing everything that makes life worth living. The Jedi Code sounds noble on paper, does it not? No attachments, no love, no emotion, a path of discipline that promises peace and clarity. But the more you think about it, the stranger it becomes. How can an entire order built on compassion outlaw the very feelings that fuel compassion in the first place? And why did they insist that shutting down emotions somehow made them better guardians of the galaxy? Take the rule against attachment, for example. At first it feels logical. The Jedi want to prevent obsession or selfishness. But then you realize it also means forbidding deep friendships, family ties, or even healthy love. Think of Anakin Skywalker, who was forced to hide his marriage, because if the council knew, they would have expelled him. The same marriage that, if acknowledged, might have given him the support system he needed to resist Palpatine's manipulations. Then there is the strange insistence on suppressing fear. Fear is not always destructive. Fear can be a natural warning system, a motivator for survival. Yet the Jedi taught their Padawans to reject it entirely. In doing so, they turned fear into shame, making it taboo to even admit vulnerability. That kind of pressure is not enlightenment, it is denial, dressed up as wisdom. Even the rule against passion feels confusing when you see how much passion the Jedi actually showed in battle. Obi-Wan screams in anguish when Qui-Gon dies. Yoda hurls himself into combat with Sidious. Mace Windu's fury practically radiates when he faces Palpatine. They are not robots. They are human and alien beings with emotions boiling under the surface. The code asked them to hide it, not master it. And that disconnect created cracks everywhere. So when you look at the code closely, it is less like a guide for peace, and more like a riddle with no solution. A puzzle box that looks elegant on the outside, but collapses when you actually try to live inside it. And that strange contradiction is where the real story begins. The frustrating part is that the Jedi could not even see the disaster coming. They followed the code like it was gospel, never stopping to ask if it even worked. They sat in the temple while the galaxy fell apart around them, convinced that the code was their shield. Meanwhile, it was actually the weight dragging them under. Look at Anakin again. His entire downfall was basically sponsored by the Jedi Code. He could not talk about his love for Padma. He could not share his fear of losing her. He could not admit to the council that he needed help. Every single roadblock that pushed him into Palpatine's arms was built by the rules of the code. The Jedi should have been his family, yet they forced him to bottle up everything until it exploded. Because, at its heart, it robbed countless Jedi of lives they could have lived. Every Padawan taken from their family, every knight told to reject love, every master forced to swallow their emotions. That is not peace, that is loneliness packaged as duty. And it is heartbreaking to realize how much they lost without ever knowing it. Think of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He followed the code to the letter, but at what cost? He loved Satine Kryze, the Duchess of Mandalore, but he buried that love because of the rules. Imagine the life he could have had, the family, the happiness. Instead, he chose the Order, only to end up alone on Tatooine, watching over the child of his fallen brother. That is tragedy in slow motion, fueled by a code that denied him love. Then there was Yoda, who lived centuries under the weight of these rules. By the time we see him in the prequels, he has become the symbol of Jedi discipline. But what does that discipline give him? Nothing but the burden of watching his order collapse. Imagine living 900 years only to discover that your philosophy led to extinction. That is sorrow on a cosmic scale. The saddest example is Anakin himself. He could have been the greatest Jedi of all time, but the code turned his love into a secret and his fear into shame. Those two things combined drove him into the arms of the Sith. The tragedy is not just that he fell, but that he was set up to fall by the very rules meant to save him. When you stack all these stories together, you see the sorrow plain as day. The Jedi Code was not just a philosophy, it was a cage. And inside that cage, one by one, the greatest Jedi broke, until there was nothing left to save. And yet, for all that sorrow, you cannot deny the sheer scale of what the Jedi built under this code. They created an order that lasted thousands of years, wielded power across the galaxy, and defended entire civilizations. Their discipline allowed them to fight wars, topple Sith empires, and maintain peace for centuries. That is an achievement that inspires awe, even if it was built on shaky foundations. Think about the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, a towering monument filled with archives, training grounds, and a council chamber where the most powerful Force users in the galaxy debated philosophy. It is hard not to be impressed by the sheer scope of it. Even if the code was flawed, it created a unified culture strong enough to rival governments. That is no small feat. And in their prime, the Jedi really were awe-inspiring. Yoda leaping through the Senate chamber in a duel with Palpatine, Mace Windu defeating Darth Sidious in combat, Obi-Wan holding his own against both Anakin and General Grievous. These were warriors and sages who pushed the Force to its limits. For generations, they were the ultimate defenders of the galaxy. Despite everything, there is still hope buried in the ashes of the Jedi Code, because even though the old ways collapsed, new generations have always found ways to rebuild. Luke Skywalker rejected the rigid rules, training Jedi with more compassion and flexibility. Rey carried that legacy further, blending the discipline of the old order with the freedom of personal choice. The failures of the code did not erase the possibility of something better. Take Ahsoka as another example. She walked away from the Jedi, but she never abandoned the values of justice and compassion. By leaving the code behind, she actually became more Jedi than the Council ever was. That choice gave fans a glimpse of what the Order could have been if it had trusted individuals over rigid rules. Even Anakin's story contains hope when you think about his final act. Despite being shaped and broken by the code, he still found redemption in the end. Saving Luke and defeating Palpatine was proof that even a Jedi crushed by the system could still choose the light. That hope is what keeps Star Wars resonating decades later, and hope shines in the idea that mistakes can be lessons. The collapse of the Jedi Order was devastating, but it also cleared the way for a new vision. Future Jedi do not have to be bound by the same shackles. They can learn from the failures of the past, and they can build something healthier, stronger, and more compassionate. So, while the Jedi Code was a death sentence, it does not have to be the final chapter. There is always room for growth, for change, and for the possibility of a brighter path ahead. When you look back at the history of the Jedi, the tragedy is inescapable. They built an empire of wisdom and power, only to see it all undone by the very rules they worshipped. The code was their foundation and their downfall. It gave them strength, but it also guaranteed their destruction. That is not just irony, that is destiny carved into stone. The resolution of their story is sobering. By the time of Order 66, the Jedi were too brittle, too blind, and too trapped in their philosophy to save themselves. They marched into battle thinking discipline was enough, and the clones turned on them in an instant. All their wisdom, all their training, all their sacrifices meant nothing against the trap that their own arrogance had built. And yet, the resolution is not hopeless, because the legacy of the Jedi still lives on, not through their code, but through their failures. Luke learns from them, Ahsoka learns from them, Rey learns from them. The tragedy becomes a lesson for the future. That is what makes the collapse meaningful, rather than meaningless. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.